Roquan Smith has a new mystery agent that's not really an agent and not allowed to be talking to other NFL teams. And Teven Jenkins has a new position on the offensive line. All that and more on today's Locked On Bears.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every day. Today we check in on a strange developing situation surrounding Roquan Smith. The league sort of formally coming out and issuing memos about a man claiming to be representing Roquan Smith, but not registered as an actual NFL agent, trying to negotiate trades with other teams, and that's tampering and against the rules for the other teams. It's not technically against the rules for Roquan Smith. There's no punishment for him specifically, but it's a weird situation. So we'll kind of catch up on what we know and what we don't know and what this all means for the Roquan Smith situation moving forward. Then we'll take a look at Teven Jenkins getting some new reps on the interior of the offensive line, kind of take a stance at where this offensive line depth chart sits right now, what it might look like on this final 53-man roster, and where Teven Jenkins may or may not fit in this Bears offensive line moving forward. And we'll wrap up with some better injury news for the most part, some players returning to practice, and how this fits in sort of the preseason plan here with a pretty short week turnaround for the Seahawks on Thursday. But the story everyone can't stop talking about right now is a man named Saint Omni and Roquan Smith. And I think, to be honest, the mystery of all this is kind of what's roping people in, because all of a sudden, Roquan Smith, who is thought to be without an agent and is known to be without an agent in negotiations with Ryan Poles throughout this whole process, now apparently has this mystery person that no one knows a ton about representing him in some capacity. So the league itself put out a memo on Monday that said, from the NFL Management Council, that warned them that a person is contacting teams about trading for Roquan Smith, and that person isn't a certified agent, and that any contact that other teams have with a player under contract, Roquan Smith, without direct written permission from the Chicago Bears is tampering. Now, a couple key things here. One, this man who, as it's reported out, is named Saint Omni, is not a NFLPA certified agent listed as actual representation of Roquan Smith. So it's not necessarily fully, above board legal representation in the same regulated contractual way that a regular agent might represent a player. But it's also important here that the Bears have not given Roquan Smith permission to seek another trade and have contact with other teams. And so even if Roquan Smith had an agent, his agent would not be allowed to talk to other teams, certified or not. And that if those teams talk to a player who has not received permission from his team to be talking to other teams, that is the definition of tampering in the NFL. And there could be draft pick or other fines and penalties for those teams talking to a player that's under contract with another team. We just saw the Dolphins get hit big time. First round pick and a future third round pick taken away for tampering with Tom Brady, a much bigger situation there with a lot bigger plans going on with him and Sean Payton. And it's kind of a wild story over there with what was going on with the Dolphins that hasn't gotten enough attention. But we sort of slowly throughout the day learned more about this Saint Omni fellow. ESPN's Courtney Cronin had tweeted out the memo from the NFLPA that said the NFLPA has informed us that a person by the name of Saint Omni, who is not an NFLPA certified agent, is contacting clubs indicating he's representing Roquan Smith. Mr. Omni is prohibited from negotiating player contracts or discussing potential trades on behalf of any NFL player or prospective player, or assisting in or advising with respect to such negotiations. Now, the NFLPA can't keep someone from forbid someone from advising a player, and that seems to be the role that we can piece together here for this Saint Omni fellow. And I do think a lot of this just has to do with his name being Saint Omni. And as someone who also has an obscure name, I'm not going to be the one on this podcast trying to necessarily poke a bunch of fun at it and make that the butt of the joke. But it's an obscure name, and if this guy's name was Bob Johnson, I don't know that it would carry as much entertainment value for the fans wondering whether he would just be generic agent guy, Agent John Smith, or a business manager named John Smith negotiating for Roquan Smith, I think is less of a story. But because people hear the name, first name Saint, last name Omni, it perks the ears a little bit more, perhaps, than a more generic, typical name you might expect for a player agent in this type of situation. But Saint Omni, not a player agent, supposedly a business manager for some kind of financial firm that works with football players. He advised Seattle Seahawks first-round pick Charles Cross in his contract negotiations. He also advised Laramie Tunzel in past contract negotiations. So he's not a stranger to the NFL negotiation scene, but apparently he might be not fully aware of the NFL rules for tampering and reaching out to other teams and what Roquan Smith does and does not have permission for. And it just raises questions about what the quality of advice is that Roquan Smith is getting from people in his life, especially if this Saint Omni fellow is not contractually obligated to be in Roquan Smith's best interests in the same way that an agent is contractually obligated to do so in exchange for a negotiated fee. It's not to say that agents are always right and always do the best thing, and that Roquan Smith hasn't made some good strategic moves and is doing the right thing in terms of trying to get as much money as he can. But the more that comes out about this, the sloppier it seems to be, and the more you question what kind of representation he's getting or what kind of advice he's getting, and then you question, how is this going to go? I mean, it's so unpredictable at this point. It's so volatile, and that's what's so tricky. It's like usually the guy's holding out, but you think eventually they're going to reach terms, or they're so far apart they're never going to reach terms and a trade is imminent. And with Roquan Smith, it's so unknown and mysterious and volatile that I just no one seems to have any idea of exactly what's going to happen out there. So we'll certainly keep an eye on for any updates here about Saint Omni and Roquan Smith situations. I'm not expecting anything to happen until end of preseason week 1 type of time. That's when more the informal deadline might start to feel, when those game checks start coming into question. Bears haven't said yet whether or not they're going to fine him for the practices he's missing now, but it's a chess match, and he's got some different guys whispering in his ear on this chessboard that we don't know how well they know chess. That seems to be clear for sure. Not the only big change, big kind of mysterious move for the Bears on Monday. Teven Jenkins making a change on the offensive line, getting a new position where he might be able to better stick on this 53-man roster. We'll kind of shake through this offensive line depth chart next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Athletic Greens, the makers of AG1. AG1 is great because it's like a super vitamin in powder form. It helps you with gut health, more energy, optimizing your immune system, and especially if you don't like the chalky taste of a vitamin, or whether you're swallowing it or chewing it or whatever you got. This supplement tastes good. It's easy to just shake up in your water bottle and drink it down smooth. It tastes delicious. It's 75 high-quality vitamins and minerals, plus whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. I mean, it just is that sort of like fill in the gaps of your nutritional value that you're not, you get a lot from food, but this can kind of get everything else that you might miss. It's really lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free or gluten-free, you name it. And any diet, AG1 can fit there. It contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no chemicals, nothing like that. It's a super vitamin. It tastes great too. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D plus 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. The Chicago Bears are working on some offensive line insurance, trying to find a spot for Teven Jenkins, moving him around now more formally to inside at the right guard position. And I think he has dabbled there a little bit at training camp practices, but on Monday he was the backup right guard behind Michael Schofield at that spot, with Riley Reiff as your starting right tackle and Larry Borom as your backup right tackle. And it's not to say necessarily that then the right tackle battle has been decided, but it seems like it's in Teven Jenkins' best interest to have more positional versatility and get a chance to show what he can do at multiple spots. Because we saw, of course, against the Chiefs on Saturday, Larry Borom started because Riley Reiff was out of the picture. Larry Borom stayed in the game for a lot of the time. Then Teven Jenkins came in at right tackle, but they kind of split those opportunities. And it was Braxton Jones at left tackle who only played with the starters and then left, despite being the 5th-round rookie, which is just even more so impressive of Braxton Jones and shows you how highly they view him, that they don't think he needs to be in there. I think your offensive line combination is pretty much set right now. Like, Braxton Jones, for all intents and purposes, seems to have won the left tackle job. And barring something unexpected, I think he's your week 1 starter at left guard or left tackle. We know at left guard, Cody Whitehair. Yeah, same there, same old. Center will be Lucas Patrick when he's healthy, but still recovering from the thumb surgery. Oof, that's tough to say. And so Sam Mustipher is starting in his place, and presumably when Lucas Patrick returns, Sam Mustipher will be your backup center, who can also play some backup guard, as that's where he had been competing prior to Lucas Patrick's injury. And Michael Schofield will be your starting right guard, although he struggled a bit in that preseason game, and I'm curious to see how open that spot could still be. Nothing's guaranteed to Schofield, but he has proven himself as a consistent veteran over the years and is still ramping up, and I think he'll end up ultimately being fine there. And then Riley Reiff is obviously going to start at one of your offensive tackle spots, and if Braxton Jones seems to have clearly won the left tackle spot, then Riley Reiff's going to be your right tackle, which then would make Larry Borom, if you're moving Teven Jenkins and you're leaving Larry Borom at right tackle, that would make Larry Borom your backup right tackle and more or less then your swing tackle. Because we've seen Larry Borom play left and right tackle. So if either of your tackles goes down, Larry Borom is going to be that guy. So then it comes down to Teven Jenkins as, your third backup offensive lineman there. I mean, you've got the other 3 rookies that you drafted competing in there: Zachary Thomas, Doug Kramer, the center, and then Ja'Tyre Carter. And Ja'Tyre Carter was getting some first-team reps at right guard when Michael Schofield was injured. So I think that's really where the most of the competition is right here. You saw Carter play right guard in relief of Schofield in the Chiefs game as well. It's sort of Teven Jenkins versus a rookie 7th-round pick for maybe that last third backup offensive line spot. Ja'Tyre Carter also played tackle in college, so there could be some of that versatility, but that does give, I think, Jenkins perhaps a little bit of a leg up. Not only is Jenkins a very talented player on tape, and he played well against the Kansas City Chiefs, I thought as well, but also he can play right tackle, or you think he could play right tackle, and also you're trying him out at guard, so he could, in a pinch, he's not your first choice at backup tackle, and Sam Mustipher might honestly be your first choice as a backup guard. So he would sort of be your second choice backup at either position, but add more value for you there than perhaps Ja'Tyre Carter, who's still learning all the whole ropes in the NFL. So it's an interesting situation, because how does that play out then in this second preseason game? Because if Riley Reiff plays, then Larry Borom would probably only play the second team, and then you'd see Teven Jenkins probably play second team right guard. But if Riley Reiff as a veteran just not going to play in these preseason games, Larry Borom would start at right tackle. So then do you give Teven Jenkins even more reps at right tackle as the sort of the true backup right tackle there? Or do you play him exclusively at right guard because you really want him to get as much right guard under his belt as possible? And we heard offensive coordinator Luke Getsy talk yesterday. I was going to pull the clip, but it wasn't very long, and it wasn't a lot that he had to say. So I don't want to just waste your time playing coach's talk to hear the coach talk. But he had said that he thought right guard is a little bit more challenging mentally than right tackle because of how often you're sort of working in combination with the players next to you, whereas at tackle, you're a little bit more on an island. And he was saying that he thought the mental aspect of the game is one of Teven Jenkins' strengths, and that can be a better fit for him at that spot. And he didn't say this, but you can also notice sometimes Teven Jenkins struggles a little bit with some speed guys coming off the edge. Happened against, I think it was George Karlaftis, against the Chiefs once or twice, where just can't get out there fast enough and can't turn with them fast enough against really speedy edge rushers. And of course, you're going to be going against much slower players on the inside at guard, but perhaps much bigger and stronger players. So you have to be more stout to be able to move them off the spot. And of course, they had Teven Jenkins cut down his weight quite a bit to play tackle, and so presumably he didn't lose much strength, but it's still a different sort of challenge moving back inside there. It's still hard for me to envision a scenario, and I guess there's not a scenario I think where they would cut Teven Jenkins. There's no way they just completely let him loose. I think at worst they would trade him right at the 53-man roster cutdown deadline to a team that would want to sign him as a free agent and would be willing to give up some draft pick in order to be able to acquire him instead of having to fight for him on the free agent market. But it's still also, I find it hard to believe that if the team hasn't traded him yet and is giving him these opportunities to try multiple positions, I would think it'd be very difficult to leave him off of the 53-man roster, to trade him just for the sake of trading him, because we know that there's so much talent still in there, and they seem to have mended whatever was keeping him out of training camp practices early on there. They claim it was an injury. He has denied that it was a clash with coaches. Whatever it is, he has been a full participant essentially since then, and they seem to have been able to work through that. And so then now he's so talented of a player, let's give him that time to keep working. Even if he's a backup and doesn't play all regular season, but just gets a whole regular season of practicing and being in the playbook and being in this offensive line and watching the film to try and be more of what we thought Teven Jenkins could be perhaps next year, even if he's not playing. And in a pinch, we've seen him play well in regular season games before. You can throw him out there if, for whatever reason, either Larry Borom or Sam Mustipher is not the guy that you want to go to in that situation. And I'm very confident in being able to put any of the other rookie draft picks, Zachary Thomas, Doug Kramer, or Ja'Tyre Carter, any of them you can put on the practice squad, and you will not have to worry about another team poaching them for their 53-man roster. They just have not been that dominant the way a Braxton Jones has, that you would be much more pressed to lose Braxton Jones there. But slowly but surely, as the lineup's changing a little bit there and the depth chart is cementing, they're getting more players back at practice healthy. We'll kind of get you the latest on who's back and who's been taking it easy and what that might mean for Thursday against the Seahawks. And then, of course, the regular season after that, next on Locked On Bears. The regular season is so close. You can feel it. You can smell it. You can almost taste it. And if you're into sports betting or fantasy, you're going to need a competitive edge to win. That's why I highly recommend the Elias Game Plan app. It's the ultimate sports betting and fantasy companion for the NFL, but also the MLB and NBA. Elias Game Plan is the only sports app from the most trusted name in sports statistics, the Elias Sports Bureau. It's the official statistician of a bunch of U.S. pro sports leagues, including the NFL. Right? I remember watching SportsCenter growing up, and they'd pull some stat, and I always say credit or source Elias Sports Bureau. This is their app, and it has everything you need, for whether it's betting or fantasy, or just you want the in-depth head-to-head team comparisons, player stats, team stats, insights from Elias's research team, you name it. It is your one-stop source. Take my advice, download the Elias Game Plan app today. Take your game to the next level with all the different new features they have available all the time. The NFL season's right around the corner, so don't wait. Get the Elias Game Plan app in the App Store or Google Play today. The Locked On Bears podcast, as always, is powered by our friends at Built Bar, the makers of the world's best tasting protein bars ever. And I just today got in a box of pina colada Built Bars. Or I think they might be Built Puffs, but every Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. These are white chocolate. And inside the actual Built Bar protein bar, there are pieces of dried pineapple with that coconut flavor in there too. It is elite. Every flavor, including pina colada, low sugar, low calories, high fiber, high protein. So you get the taste of a pina colada candy bar with the nutrients of a protein bar. You cannot find other protein bar products on the market that meet this combination of being good for you and tasting good. It satisfies my sweet tooth. It's my guilty pleasure that you don't have to feel guilty about. You got to try them for yourself. Head on over to built.com, enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Chicago Bears roster at training camp has been a bit more than 15% off for quite a few days now, leading up from all the way over last weekend through into the preseason game. It has been a little bit of a skeleton crew out there. And we saw in the preseason game, you're missing a lot of your good receivers, your top tight ends, your top running back, a couple of offensive linemen, and then defensively, a shell of a secondary and missing, of course, Roquan Smith at linebacker as well. Starting to get some better news on the injury front as some players returning to practice, and I think it confirms a theory I had about going into that preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs. So first, the names. Back at practice on Monday, Kyler Gordon, the rookie cornerback, Elias Jones, the rookie wide receiver, and then David Montgomery, Cole Kmet, the backup tight end, James O'Shaughnessy, and defensive end Mario Edwards, who we have not heard a lick about all training camp. And I'm really curious how he's going to fit into this rotation, because I really think he could still be a sleeper for this defensive line who could play 3 technique on the inside or play the 4-3 defensive end in that rotation. And if he's healthy and playing well, he could make it easier to trade Robert Quinn at the trade deadline. That's a little bit farther out in the future, but also worth noting, not participating in practice again, but sort of just working on the side with, exercise bikes and just kind of hanging out. Jaquan Brisker, Byron Pringle, Justin Jones, and wide receiver Tajay Sharp. So good to have some of those names back quickly, and it confirms one of my working theories for leading into that Chiefs preseason game, that they had days with 20 and 21 guys sitting out of training camp practice, and at least that many didn't play in the preseason game. And my theory was that because Matt Eberflus is always those guys are all just day to day. They'll be back soon. We're not super worried about any of them being super long term. I would bet that if Kyler Gordon and Elias Jones and David Montgomery and Cole Kmet were able to return to practice on Monday, 2 days after the preseason game, I would think that had that preseason game been a regular season game on Sunday instead of Saturday, that at least all 4 of those players, if not a number of other players, could have played. Right? There's no reason to force, especially David Montgomery and Cole Kmet and even James O'Shaughnessy and Mario Edwards, the veteran guys. I believe that they're injured, right? I believe that they're a little banged up. But there's no reason for those guys especially to force them out there to be practicing all the time at training camp, and certainly not to be playing in these preseason games when they don't really need them, right? They need some practice. They couldn't sit out all of training camp and expect them to be good to go. But if they're even a little bit iffy, if there's even any risk of making an injury worse or doing anything that could jeopardize their ability to play week 1 and for the regular season, there's just no reason to make sure that those guys are out there. So I'm perfectly on board with the way the Bears have been handling it. And it's why we talked last week on the podcast about let's not overreact and be super concerned about the injuries. If the Bears had 4 players with torn ACLs and then a torn Achilles here and a broken arm or whatever, if they had a rash of season-ending injuries, that's when we could start to have more of a concern about, okay, what are they doing at these practices? Are they pushing these guys too hard? Are they giving them enough rest? A lot of teams have had plenty of injuries at training camp. The Bears are not exclusive there, or not far and away way above anything any other team is seeing injury-wise. And so it's good to have some of those guys back out there. And then the guys that are practicing on the side, Jaquan Brisker played in the preseason game. Justin Jones played in the preseason game. Tajay Sharp played in the preseason game. I don't think any of those guys suffered some sort of major hidden injuries while playing in that game. It was just, all right, you played, and some of those guys played a little bit, and let's just take it easy on you today. It's giving them that rest to make sure they don't exacerbate their injuries. And interesting that Byron Pringle back on the bike already among the names there. We're sort of expecting with his quad injury that it might be closer to the regular season that he's actually back for the Bears. And the fact that he's just on the bikes, working out on the sideline, getting some cardio in, does not mean he's close to returning necessarily. But that is faster and more progress than I would have thought to see Byron Pringle's name on that list. So that's, at the very least, some amount of an encouraging sign for week 1, especially. I wouldn't expect to see Pringle in preseason games and very limited practice, I would guess, because, again, these guys are veterans. They're learning the playbook and stuff. They do need some practice, but they don't need to be out there all the time, and they don't need to be risking their health, especially now with a short week turnaround for a Thursday night game against the Seahawks. I wonder if a guy like Montgomery and Cole Kmet, they kind of said, you could play on Saturday, but we're about to have a 4-day turnaround to the Seahawks on Thursday. Let's save you for that one. Let's give you a little bit extra time, skip this first game, make sure then you're ready to go for Thursday, get your one preseason game of action in there, really like one quarter or a couple of drives of preseason game, and then shut them down for the third preseason game. Let them kind of practice and leave it for that for week one. And it seems like that's what the plan is with guys like Gordon and Velus Jones coming back as well. Ramp up for preseason against the Seahawks, if they even want to play them against the Seahawks. I'm guessing we will. That seems to be Matt Eberflus's MO here of getting some guys some of that playing time. But hey, as we get closer and closer to game day, we'll keep you up to date on all of the injury developments and the lineups we can expect to see on Thursday. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep coming back and getting all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, we've got Locked On Fantasy Football for you here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make that your second listen. Fantasy expert Vinny Iyer has been doing this for over 20 years. He'll give you a unique angle for the moves no one else has. So get ready for your fantasy draft or your upcoming season with Locked On Fantasy Football. Then come on back tomorrow for another Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.